All right, what is going on, boyos? Trying a new little video format today. Gonna see how it goes. I put up a community post, I think it was yesterday, asking you guys for video topics. And this time the plan is whichever ones get the most likes are what I'm gonna do, regardless on my feelings. I'm gonna figure out how to make a good video out of them. Today is a pretty boring training session. It's an event day that is fairly light. I think the bulk of the work today is going to be yoke carries, let's see, front and side planks, dead hangs for time for some grip work, one motion stone of steel loads for a bunch of reps, and then probably some pull-ups, maybe one other motion. I just don't remember off the top of my head. But the plan, because the training is not interesting, I may film some of it, I may not. The plan is to start addressing the current most liked comment on that community post. Also, if you have video topics you want to see, it could be just specific educational stuff. It could be just like more day in the lifestyle stuff. It could be whatever you guys want. I'm pretty open to most ideas. Head over to that community post, put them there. Also take a moment to read through other people's ideas and take a second to like the ones that you would like to see. That kind of gives me a sense for what the most people find entertaining, whereas just if everybody leaves their own idea, one might be a wildly popular idea and one might be really popular and I would have no idea. So hop over there if you have video ideas. That way I can sort through them. And the one right now that is up that has the most support was just kind of making a video series kind of mirroring what Paris, Mr. Bald Omni-Man, has done, taking dedicated videos to sit down in front of a whiteboard and just explain progression schemes he likes, when he would use them, why he would use them, what they do, why they work. Which could just be kind of an ongoing, indefinite thing of just like little progression schemes that you can build into your training. I definitely see the value in that kind of video. I remember being earlier in my training career when I was familiar with less random little progression schemes. I was like, okay, well, I kind of understand my frequencies. I kind of understand all of this stuff, like what exercises I should be doing. I kind of get that. I get maybe I should start a block a little bit lighter with a little bit more volume and it should progress towards heavier weights with less volume. I understand all this, but I'm having this real disconnect of when the rubber meets the road. How many reps and sets do I do? How do I progress those? I don't want to just come in with this vague concept of I'm going light right now and then I'm going to go heavier. How do I transition from certain sets of 8 to sets of 5 to 3? What are the percentages? And a lot of people have a hesitancy to learn the ability to use RPE. I would suggest maybe you get over that. It's a very powerful training tool that kind of eliminates this idea that you need to arbitrarily guess percentages, because I do think that's a bit of a misunderstanding. People just go, well, what percentage should I do here? Well, it depends, right? Some people are better at reps than others. And with that comes the idea that a set of 8 at a fixed percentage might be an impossible set for person A, and it might be such a sub-maximal set that it isn't valuable for person B. That is a problem, right? So if we just work off of pure percentages, reps to sets, it doesn't scale, and it's going to be a miss for a lot of people. Percentage is just an arbitrary shot in the dark based on averages of how many reps someone can achieve at a given percentage. And it's not as though it doesn't hold value, but it is kind of an arbitrarily selected load. And RPE allows the person executing the program who has the most input about what is an easy set and what is a hard set. It allows them to scale that set of 8, for example, to an actual loading range that it should be. And that is something that's going to, if you get the skill down of selecting loads based on an RPE, allow you to kind of get a customized program by default, right? So if I told you, oh, we're gonna do 3 sets of 8 at 70% or whatever the hell we're doing, right? Again, there's going to be a pretty solid percentage if you're watching for whom that's going to be a really easy workout and it just wasn't helpful, and you either needed to do more sets than that or you needed to do more load than that to make it a really disruptive workout for homeostasis, right? And then there's other people where that might just be brutal, right? If you're crazy strong, 3 sets of 8, even at 70% might be just a disgustingly hard workout. or if you have a poor work capacity, it depends on your prior training history. So there's lots of things that make it so that just like straight suggestions for, oh, here's the reps, here's the sets, here's the percentage, aren't viable. But we can kind of get into some different ways that I like to use the RPEs or use percentage ranges and RPEs. But those videos definitely would require a whiteboard to be done well. And while I do have some whiteboards, they are all in use for my own training. So at some point I'll have to buy another whiteboard for dedicated videos. There's a pretty cheap one that I bought for these at Target. So I'll probably go get another one of those at some point or another. But in the time being, the plan for today's video was just to touch on some simple and easy thoughts on progression schemes, right? So we're gonna maybe have some rambling thoughts, maybe address one or two other of the video topics that I might not get to eventually in this one. And we're gonna bounce back and forth between me doing my sets and giving you my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. Okay, I am back. I figured while I am resting between rounds of my warm-up giant set, I figured it would be a good option to first get a little caveat out of the way, right? And this is something I have to remind myself all the time as well, so I don't want to come off as preachy about it, right? But I need to remind some people, it seems like, that at no point are we ever above mid-level information, right? I think probably in general, I am a bit of a recluse, so I only really talk to people about lifting on the internet because I never leave my house. But I'm guessing this is just like a human phenomenon. But within lifting, I notice a lot of people will decide they're above a certain level of information simply because they've been exposed to it before. Just because you have heard something before and just because it's not novel doesn't mean it's not something you should really listen to, take a second and think, well, am I applying this to my training? There's a lot of people that I meet, and it's a bizarre phenomenon. When I train in town at the gym, back when I lived in Tacoma and worked out always at a powerlifting gym with a bunch of other people there, I would talk to people and I would find these guys that are able to repeat back to me a tremendous amount about programming and strength training, and they got a really good knack for remembering a lot of the minutia of programming, and they can repeat it back to me. But if you look at their program, one of two things is often going on. One, they have all of these things that they can repeat back to me, perfect phrasing, like I got nothing to disagree with, but their program is nearly incoherent. Right? So they have memorized all of these different platitudes and they could repeat them back to their friend, but maybe the rubber hasn't met the road and they haven't accumulated enough time in the gym to kind of know how those things relate to practical programming. And that's fine, that makes sense. I mean, good on you for researching ahead of time. I was certainly like this to a degree earlier in my career where I felt my knowledge maybe superseded my strength, and that's probably a better place to be than being stronger than you are informed about what you're doing. But the other one is like some people will be able to repeat all this stuff back to me, but they are making very poor strength progression. I've met a very odd number of people that have this, I would say, far above average knowledge of programming, but their progression rate themselves is mediocre. And people talk about like, I know it's not actually what the Dunning-Kruger effect is, but how it's popularly explained is just this idea that like, as you have more experience in a field, your perceived confidence rises and rises and rises, and you reach the peak of Mount Stupid, and then you learn enough to know that you don't know that much, and it comes back down, and then slowly as you actually become an expert in a field, your confidence rises back up again, but you're never as confident as you are at the top of peak Mount Stupid or whatever the fuck it is, right? And I know that's not what the actual Dunning-Kruger effect is, so I know. But I does feel like there's a lot of people kind of at that peak where they do know a hell of a lot, and they just tell me like, oh, this is beginner information. Sam, I need advanced information. And I look at them and I'm like, the reason that you are not progressing is not because of a lack of advanced information. It's the fact that you're executing intermediate information really poorly, or you change your program every 2 weeks because you know so many different things that you never stick with one thing long enough to really enjoy the benefit. Like you're switching your variation on your squat every 2 weeks because you think you've cracked the code, when really if you were dumb and you just got this routine and you copied it verbatim out of a magazine and just tried your best at it, you might have made better progression. Now, is the stuff you know correct? Yes, absolutely, right? Each of the things that people repeat back to me is solid, but it was the failure to implement any of it that was the problem, right? And so I will still watch videos I deem for intermediate lifters. Maybe I don't really watch many videos that are for beginner lifters anymore, if I'm being perfectly frank. I do kind of find that boring, as many people seem to find like the intermediate level videos, right? But I do like a good nuanced intermediate level video because sometimes someone will give me like an angle I haven't looked at something at. Or I might just give me a second to say, okay, well, I've always known this. At one point in time, I was doing a good job with this, but wait a minute, I'm fucking this up right now. I need to fix that. And often rekindling our efforts in the basics is where we will regain our training momentum that we lost, right? We're like, oh man, I must have become advanced. My training momentum is gone. Well, maybe you're not at such a trained state that training momentum is super hard to come by though. Maybe you've started to slack on some of the basics that got you here. You know, you got to dance with the girl that brought you. When you were really passionate in your intermediate phase, when you were seeing like crazy gains left and right, you were doing a great job with your food and your sleep, and because you were thinking about the shit 24/7, but you've been doing it a little while and you started to slack off on those things and your progress has slowed. It's not because you became advanced, it's because you started doing a shittier job. So reminder to us all, myself included, I don't want to come off as a preachy asshole, but you're never above intermediate like information. I watch lots of videos that are concepts I've heard a million times just to look for a little difference in phrasing, maybe make me reflect on what I do in a different way. And that's kind of going to bridge into the topic of today's video, right? We're kind of making the first and hopefully a series of me sharing progression models that I find helpful. And we're going to start from the really simple stuff that I might not need a whiteboard, maybe move to some more advanced ones. And today we're just going to talk about accessories a little bit. I'm going to go do my next round of this giant set before I get too cold. Whew. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about accessories a little bit. And if you guys are the people that watch all of my videos, which I'm guessing this isn't going to be a super popular video, so the viewer base is going to be kind of my loyal, I think it's like 400 or 500 people watch every single video. And I appreciate all you guys. You guys are my friends as far as I'm concerned because you watch all of them. That means you're not just tangentially interested in some of them, you're interested in the stuff I'm putting out, which is very flattering to me. I appreciate that a good deal. It means a lot to me. I've always kind of wondered why people care what I have to say, and the fact that that many people care what I have to say is awesome. So you guys who watch my videos regularly probably have heard me maybe belabor a point to a degree that seems kind of silly. You'll hear me mention all the time, like, if you're trying to increase your bench press, make sure you're doing enough bench pressing to where you could probably get a better from doing that alone, right? And you're like, well, that sounds kind of obvious. Are people fucking that up? Why does he say this over and over? And maybe it's less of an issue nowadays. I don't talk to many people, so I don't kind of know what the current climate is. But this was a big issue kind of earlier in my lifting career that I would see. People realized that working hard on your accessories could speed up your rate of progression on your main lifts quite a bit, right? You're hypertrophying relevant musculature. You guys know that's my whole pitch is probably one of the biggest things we can do in our efforts to get stronger is just to increase the cross-sectional area of the relevant muscles. It works really well. So people found out that, hey, wow, if I actually work hard enough on my accessories to really grow muscle, I get stronger. That's crazy, right? And people started to go crazy, like, this is the one accessory that's gonna make your bench press go from shit to good, right? And it's like, realistically, what's gonna make your bench press go shit to good is lots of good outside the gym habits, good effort in the gym 2 to 3 days a week, doing a decent amount of bench pressing, refining your technique, and also putting on muscle. This idea that some singular accessory is the one thing standing between you and a bigger bench press, because it's marketable and clicky and cool, was something I saw a lot of people doing. Is like, what accessory, Sam? What accessory? Why do you bench a lot? And I'm like, I like my accessories. I think they help, but it almost became like people would like just get through their benching like without putting much thought into it, so then they could go crush their accessories. And you can drive some okay progression that way, but you're not likely to end up very skilled at the benching, and your result is not going to be what it could have been if you were applying a lot of that effort to the thing you actually wanted to get good at, right? So I want to get that caveat out of the way of what I always say, which is the main thing. The main thing should be the bulk of your efforts to get better at that thing. If it's benching and it's close variations. If it's deadlifting and it's close variations, right? But accessories are helpful. So we're going to talk about like why we might take some different approaches to progressing our accessories, and then a couple of the really obvious options that I like. Okay, so there's actually a lot of reasons why we might be doing a given accessory, right? The most common one is just hypertrophying relevant muscles. Very simple. We've talked about this a lot. I probably don't need to go on about this any more than I have, right? So we've got, that is the obvious one. And there could be multiple reasons for a single accessory. There could be a singular reason. And just because that's the most popular one doesn't mean that it's going to be the only one, right? Kind of obvious. We might be doing an accessory to try to address a mobility deficit. So like kind of a loaded mobility drill. We might be doing something to address like a positional tolerance issue if we're trying to get over an injury or some pain. We might be doing something for a skill, right, that might carry over to the skills that we use in our main lift. So sometimes some people like doing some like band walks before they squat, not because it's going to develop that much hypertrophy or strength necessarily, but because it kind of gives them more proprioceptive skill of spreading the floor when they squat, which is just a cue that some people like. And they find that doing this accessory helps them with the skill, and when they execute that skill on their main lift, they get better, right? So it merits its place in training. And I think all that I ask is that you should be able to look at each motion in your training and give a articulate reason why it's there. Your reason might be wrong, and that's totally fine. Hard work is seldom wasted. If you're training hard in the gym and you're doing these exercises, even if they're not perfectly selected for the perfect rationale, you're probably going to get better. I've seen a lot of people make really good progress because they wrote up a plan and they had some issues they wanted to address, and they picked some things in their plan to address each issue. And even if they weren't the best selected, because they wrote out a plan that addressed each of these things and they had their idea that they were testing, they got way better results than someone who was just kind of winging it or changing what they're doing all the time. They just took an approach and they stuck with it. And even if that approach only gives you 50% of the result you wanted, kind of having this indiscreet, not like you haven't taken the chance to think of how you're going to try to address this issue. If you have no plan of attack, you're definitely going to fall below that 50% that you would have got from a bad plan. So as long as you can explain it, you're like, oh, that's just big triceps, big bench, big triceps. Good enough for me. Or, oh, that's because like my balance is shit in my squat. That sounds like a perfectly good rationale to me. It doesn't always have to be hypertrophy. If you're just like, I'm bad at this, my theory is this could help. Awesome, experiment in your training, right? And accessories is an area that you're allowed to experiment a lot because like I said, we should almost be able to progress well in the absence of our accessories just because of how much we're doing of the main lifts, which gives us a lot of freedom to kind of scratch that creative testing itch on our accessories because we should be able to progress regardless. And that's kind of where you can scratch that itch. If you're one of those guys, you're like, well, fuck, I know I'm a program hopper. Or I know I change my own program too often. And that's kind of what slowed my progress. But I want to try things. I've got things I want to see if they work. Try to stick to the same progression and the same frequencies and approach on the main lifts, and then scratch that itch by trying different accessories and see how they bolster your progress on the main lifts. And that way you can, it's almost like a lower risk way of fiddling and tinkering with your program, right? And as long as you have a reason for why you think it might help, or if it's just because, oh, well, I'm doing curls there, that's not to help anything. That's for my side goal of having big arms. Awesome, good explanation, right? And you could get really abstract with them and say, oh, well, this is to build up my work capacity because I feel like I gas out on squats. Awesome, that's a great accessory too. And so we can, to reap the benefits though of the accessories, almost regardless of the rationale. Maybe there are some like the skill type things where just by doing the exercise with some amount of focus, we're going to reap the benefit, fair enough. But the majority of them, there's also a level of effort that we have to reach on the accessory to enjoy the effects and find out if it actually worked, right? So let's take the simple reason we might be doing an accessory for hypertrophy. There's a certain proximity to failure that we need to hit on a given set in, let's say, the 5 to 30 rep range for that to actually give us the goal that we want to get from it. So if we do split squats, but we're always tired at the end and we sandbag them, and if we never hit an RPE 6 on them, we can't say they didn't help our squat because we never tried to do them hard enough to actually see if they worked at all. And that is where you could just say, oh, we'll work hard. And some people kind of have that wiring in their head where I'm like, hit a couple of sets of 6 to 15-ish on some split squats at the end. They're always gonna make sure they work hard on those, and I trust that they're gonna hit the threshold to get the benefit, and that could work for them. But the majority of people, to keep us accountable on days where maybe our internal motivation is a little bit less, that's where something like a beat the books, right? Beat the books just says, okay, well, you need to do one more rep than last week. And that's guaranteed, that basically guarantees that you're not gonna have this relapse in effort. If you're always having to improve the external result, obviously that's not always possible, but the book kind of just provides an accountability system for effort, and that's where it really shines. And that's where progression schemes for accessories come in. Is I could just say, okay, well, RPE 7 to 8, 4 sets of 8 to 12. Do your split squats. And basically, if you always hit that sufficient RPE, progressive overload will apply itself. You're gonna need more weight to hit the desired RPE in that rep range with time, because you get stronger as a byproduct of your hypertrophy. But not everybody is going to be able to be that accountable with it. And that's where we start kind of using progression systems of like the rep target system, using beat the books and saying, okay, well, I've got 3 sets. I will stop the set at 12. And if I can once I get to 12, 12, 12, I add weight. And then I try to build my way up to 12, 12, 12. So maybe I got 12, 10, 8. Next week, I'll look for 12, 11, 9. And that's like the simplest one we can do is just this rep target system. We kind of approximate how many sets we need on a given exercise to kind of really tax that musculature. If it's something big, you might even find that like, oh, well, if I hit one actually at the RPE set of hack squats, I feel like I'm pretty fried, and any work past this is almost redundant, more fatiguing than it is stimulative. Something big like a hack squat, maybe even one set in a higher rep range could be sufficiently taxing. Whereas maybe when we get into smaller muscles, you might find, oh, well, with rear delts, I certainly can't sufficiently tax my rear delts to grow in a singular set. We need to start getting 3, 4, 5. So we find a number of sets. We find a rep range that's practical for that exercise. You might find, going to really high reps on this exercise tends to be purely cardiovascular. So maybe I'll go in the lower end of the hypertrophy rep range. So maybe our target rep is 8. Maybe this exercise going really heavy on rear delt flies feels stupid to you. So maybe our target will be 15 to 20 reps. We do that number of sets, and once we can kind of fill out 15, 15, 15, 15, we go up in weight, and it's just a beat the book system on straight sets. And that's kind of the simplest one that we can take that will work for most muscle building focused accessories. Now, another one you might frequently use is like a beat the books for time. If you're training your grip, or planks, for example, more isometric focused exercises, you could do the exact same premise in seconds, where you've got 3 sets. Regardless of how hard it was, you finish the set at 30 seconds. And then once you can do 3 rounds of 30 seconds, we add more weight to our dead hang or our hold or our plank or whatever it is, right? And that can be a way to actually bother to overload those exercises and actually get better at them and reap the benefits. Lots of people just never work hard enough on a plank to see the benefits of doing planks. As a simple example, so we can do this beat the book system of, okay, I got 15 seconds, I'm gonna go hard. Like, going to RPE 10 on your plank isn't going to fry your CNS. I mean, CNS fatigue is probably the wrong term for what we're calling there. It's not gonna fry you, right? It's not gonna be so fatiguing that it's bad. So we may as well work really hard on those to ensure we're getting the benefit. And you say, okay, well, I got 15 seconds last week. goddamn, I'm gonna listen to some edgy music and I'm gonna go for 20 this week. I'm gonna be better this week than I was last week. And that's gonna ensure that you bring that sufficient effort. Is going to failure necessary for hypertrophy? Absolutely not. But I would rather go to failure than be too far from failure to see the benefits and just program around that extra fatigue on a lot of accessories. Some stuff really heavy, I don't go to failure, right? I'm probably leaving a couple in the tank as on paper you should for hypertrophy training, right? Again, sorry for repeating points that a lot of you know, but it's pretty well established scientifically, this idea that the final reps are more fatiguing than they are stimulative. So instead of doing 1 or 2 all-out sets, it might be better to instead do 3 or 4 sets, leaving 1 to 3 in the tank. And I think that's a very reasonable approach to take for your accessories. But that being said, that's on paper. The issue is that people aren't always the best at appraising how many reps in reserve they have. And like I said, if I'm gonna be wrong, I would rather be wrong towards it being close to failure or to failure, in which case maybe I have to do less sets, but I know those sets are stimulative, than rather risk that all of my sets are insufficiently stimulative. So on lower effort motions, just to make it idiot proof, because I'm dumb, we're gonna do tricep press downs with the rope until I can no longer lock my elbows. And that way, yes, it was 0 RIR, but that's not gonna be that fatiguing. It'll be okay, right? So there's lots of things where we're just coming in with that mentality of listen to some edgy music, be better than we did last week. Not necessary, but it's a good accountability system. And so what I just touched on actually brings us to a little difference in how two people might approach their accessories, right? It's kind of a disagreement within the bodybuilding community. I would say that at least for the smart people, it's not necessarily a disagreement, it's just a difference in how people do things, right? You could either take less sets with a closer proximity to failure, more Dorian Yates style training. Lots of current IFBB pros will advocate for this lower volume approach. Someone like Hunter Labrada, Ian Valliere would be like two examples of people who are more vocal for this lower volume, higher intensity style of training. And one of the biggest benefits of that is just, you know that your sets are X level of stimulative, and then you just do the number of sets accordingly, right? Whereas maybe you could fit in more productive sets at the risk of how accurately calibrated those RIR are. Right, and then on the other side of the coin, where you have people like Mike Israetel who are vocal advocates for an RIR-based system and doing a more volume-focused approach, right? So we as strength-focused guys, well, we're trying to get hypertrophy out of our accessories, so we should take a page from the guys who specialize in hypertrophy. So we might want to take somewhere on this continuum of approach for our accessories, right? And you can find what works best for you, either mentally or physically. Some people just find, okay, well, maybe it is slightly suboptimal, but I just love my training when I do take a lot of my accessories to failure. And if you love your training, it's probably going to be the move, as long as it's not dangerous or something. And I think some exercises will lend themselves more to that Dr. Mike style approach, and some maybe will lend themselves pretty well to that more like Dorian Yates style, few all-out sets. So we can either do straight sets, aiming for 12 reps, 4 of them, or if you're someone who's just like, man, I just find myself being a bitch. Realistically, I filmed my set the other day. I would have made fun of my friend. I would have said, hey, you didn't hit your RIR. You're training like a bitch. Obviously, that's why you're not growing, right? And I'll find myself doing this on certain exercises where I just, when I'm doing straight sets, I find myself sandbagging. And that's where you might say, okay, I'm gonna think about this as an AMRAP. This is going to failure, right? So we're gonna have to do less sets. And it's easy to think about I think a lot of people will sandbag if they're doing straight sets. So maybe on one exercise, I'll just be like, no, I just got one top set. I'll warm up well for it. I'll take some feeder sets, make sure I'm warmed up and good to go. I'm gonna go all out until I mechanically fail a rep. If it's something where it's safe to do so, I will go to failure. And once I hit 12 reps on that failure set, I'll add weight. And maybe I find, okay, well, this one all out set on this exercise, I'm not frying the muscle. Maybe I'll do a back off. So I'll have 2 all out sets. And on the back off, if I hit 20 reps, I add weight to that one. So rather than that more straight set focused approach of beat the books, we can go kind of 1 to 2 more all out sets as just a different way of approaching it that might work better for you, or it might lend itself better to certain exercises. And that is also a very good option. And then like anything else, it's gonna be a spectrum. It's not just one side or the other. There's all kinds of training in between. Someone like John Meadows was a big advocate of, okay, well, I'm gonna hit 1 or 2 easier sets beforehand and then 1 failure set. Rather than every set in training goes to failure, well, I'm gonna use some of one and some of the other, and you can find that different exercises lend themselves to different methods there. The next one we can talk about for progressing our accessories, simple system, as old as time, is just a total rep system. If something doesn't lend itself to loading in a certain way, we can just say, okay, hey, you have 20 pull-ups. If you get that in 4 sets or less, we're gonna add 2 next week, or 1 next week, or 3 next week, depending on how easy it was. And that's how we're gonna achieve this accountability for effort, rather than just saying, oh, we'll do 3 sets of pull-ups to failure. people are going to sandbag the first one or two a lot of the time, right? So if we just say, as long as that total workload is increasing, we're kind of good. Sometimes this can be used for exercises that don't scale well. Pull-ups and glute ham raises would be or Nordic hamstring curls would be another one, would be some that jump out at me, push-ups, things that don't have easy scaling options for everyone. We can take more of a total rep focused approach, or I do like it for some like more localized exercises, more isolation based exercises. I might just say, hey, you have 100 reps of rear delt flies with the 10 pounds. Do that in as few sets as possible. And if you get it in this number of sets, we'll do a little bit more. And it's just 100 total reps or 50 total reps. So a total rep system, one of two ways. We can either say, okay, well, if you get it in this number of sets, we increase the number of total reps we're doing, or you can keep the target total reps fixed and then increase the weight when you can do it in a certain amount of time or in a certain number of sets. So that can be another way on certain accessories where it's just like, man, I did 4 sets of rear delt flies. I don't feel like my rear delts are smoked. How can I make this more challenging? Well, you say, okay, we got 100 fucking reps. Do that in as few sets as you can. You might be a little bit more taxed at the end. So something where, again, you're feeling like you're unable to do the exercise hard enough to benefit from doing it. You can use one of those systems. And then the other one that I often like is I just say, hey, here is a weight. Here is a time you put on the clock. Do as many reps as you can in 5 minutes. And if in 5 minutes you got this many reps, we add a little weight. And that can be something like, that's what I do for my rear delt work a lot of the times, because I never felt like my rear delts were growing. I never felt like I was like, well, I do these rear delt flies every bench day, but I don't feel like I'm working hard enough on them realistically to get better, right? I don't think I'm driving change. Like, yes, it makes my shoulders feel kind of nice, but if I worked a little harder, would I get bigger benefit from these? And I found that like, just putting 5 minutes on the clock, putting on my headphones, playing some loud music and just going ham for 5 minutes, suddenly my rear delt started growing. Suddenly my bottom position felt better in my overhead press. I started seeing the effects that this exercise should have on paper. And it was just because I wasn't working hard enough on them to see the benefit. So that's another system I like, is time on the clock. I remember, I forget who it was, but someone always used to do this row workout. And I love this row workout. It's kind of silly, it's kind of different, but I think it is somewhat effective training. They would just say, okay, you got 10 minutes on the clock, you have X weight on the bar. If you can hit 100 barbell rows in that 10 minutes, we're gonna add weight next week. And yeah, on paper, there's lots of things you could probably nitpick about that, making it suboptimal hypertrophy training. But when I've tried it, it kept me accountable for a level of effort that drove a tremendous amount of progression. All right, and so earlier I talked about how it's not just this ultimatum of either, oh, I always leave reps in reserve so that way I can accumulate all this cool volume, or, oh, I always go to failure, bro. If you don't train to failure, you're not gonna grow. John Meadows, a very smart guy, was just like, well, let's use a mix of these, right? And one way we can use a mix of these, so we talked about some progression models I like to favor towards for lower scale stuff as an accommodation to really work hard, right? Because if you're not working hard on an exercise, you might get some initial benefit out of novelty, but you're probably not going to continue to get better at it. If you're not continuing to get better at it, you're probably not going to reap the rewards of doing the exercise. So I talked about some considerations I like to use to make some exercises harder if they're kind of lower scale exercises. It's kind of hard to really disrupt your body with them. But let's say we're doing some bigger exercises. And one of the ways that I like to use this mix of failure and non-failure sets is to use an RPE audit system. What's an RPE audit system? It's just the idea of, okay, well, we're gonna do a few sets supposedly to this RPE, and then on the final set, or this RIR, either or, somewhat interchangeable nowadays, and we take the final set to failure. And that's gonna kind of tell us like, well, shit, on the first 3 sets, I did 8 reps. I thought all 3 of those were 2 to 3 RIR, but then I balled out and I did 15 on the final set. That is your wake-up call that you're not working as hard on those presets as you thought you were. And you might need to do less sets and focus on bringing sufficient effort, and then maybe try to build into doing more sets at this higher effort. But you need to recalibrate your system of what is working hard. So I like this idea of like, okay, we're gonna take 2 sets to what you think is this, and then the final one, X weight. Or we could say, all right, we're gonna go 2 sets of 8 on incline bench, for example. And then assuming we have a spotter or catches up, we're gonna take the last one to failure. And as soon as we hit 12 reps on the failure set, that means we graduate weights. So it's 8, 8 AMRAP. And that would, because if we hit 12, suddenly we're at 4 RIR for those presets. That's our indicator that those aren't valuable anymore. So that could be one that I really like to use. Or we could just say, well, we're gonna take that top AMRAP first because this person is really motivated by chasing rep PRs. And they just wanna say they got a new set of 8 on the leg press, a new set of 8 on their pull-ups. And that's what keeps them fired up. Awesome, go for it, man. Like, effort is going to be one of the biggest predictors of how much better someone gets. And that's effort in the gym, but also effort in terms of their food and their sleep and all that stuff. And enjoying your training is probably the most reliable way to get the best effort out of someone. So if someone's just like a rep PR addict, you have to hammer home that like we got to keep our form standardized for those rep PRs to count, right? So they're not just going like shittier and shittier with their form, achieving non-genuine overload. But we could say, okay, let's just take your big set first. You could chase your rep PR on the pull-ups, even if they get a little sloppy. There's not a meaningful injury risk there. But please don't just do only that. Take some back off sets. Drop the weight back 10%, hit 2 to 3 sets, leaving 1 or 2 in the tank, right? So it's kind of the same system as what we just talked about with the audit system, but instead we're taking that rep out first, and because we're pretty gassed, we drop a little weight back, and then we do our sub-max sets. And these are progression schemes that I also sometimes use on the main compound lifts as well. So that'll be a little bit of a spoiler for later. That's something I like to throw. Either of those are valid options to throw in there on compounds as well, but we're gonna get into a little bit more detail because I think there is more nuance to the motions where we care about our strength because technique is pivotal. We can't just kind of like go ape shit and expect to be, let's say, a really good squatter, for example, right? Is if you could get huge legs just being like, yeah, bro, I come in, I do 2 to 3 sets of leg extensions to failure, 2 to 3 sets of hamstring curls to failure. Then I either hop on the squat or the hack squat and I train to failure. And then I hop on like the leg press. Then I do some lunges. And all of these are really high effort. You could get some absolutely gargantuan legs that way. I would say it's pretty good training to some degree. Maybe I think you could make a strong argument that on those bigger compounds like the squats and the hack squats, leaving a little bit of RIR there is probably a better approach from a fatigue management standpoint, and that's fine. But aside from that, you could say, okay, well, that's how we approach legs. You're gonna get really big legs, but you are probably not going to be the heaviest 1RM squatter you could be because squatting is a skill and the best squatters do a lot more squatting than just that 1 to 2 all out sets with variable form because they need to do sub-maximal sets to get highly skilled at the motion, and then they start applying some intensity and then they practice the skill of upper end squat singles with walkouts and holds and whatever the hell else they're doing, right? So it's like there's a difference. That difference between hypertrophy leg training and training for a really heavy squat does diverge a little bit because of just the higher skill component of a squat. And that's something we're going to touch on later. But some of these progression schemes I do like. All right, as I do the yoke, the blood is leaving my brain and going to all of my joints. But that kind of brings me to the end of the obvious accessory progression models that jump out at me off the top of my head. One thing you could also put in there is like some people following these progression models, it's better to use smaller incremental jumps. So when you hit your rep target, we'll just use that one for example, we just add 5 pounds total. So 2.5 to each side. Some people find that it's more motivating to them to use a little bit bigger increments when they finally graduate from a weight. So rather than just putting a 5 or a 2.5 on each side, maybe let's say it's a leg press, they only go in 1 plate increments or plate and a 25 increments. Or maybe we go kind of the old school, like the increments we use are plate and a 10, plate and a 25, plate and a 35, 2 plate, right? And we don't go in between those. And that can give some people more motivation to hit their rep targets because they want to graduate to the next meaningful weight instead of making a small arbitrary jump. Other people find the progression is smoother with the smaller jumps. That'd be the only other thing that jumps to my head. That being said, blood is leaving my brain, so bear with me. Moral of the story, if an accessory is worth doing, it's worth training hard. So remember little old Samwise, when you're sandbagging your accessories, at least do the last one as a real tough set. And I hope you will thank me for it. If you hurt yourself, you did not hear that here. On a more personal note, thank you guys for watching my videos. It really means a lot to me. I definitely lead a very odd life nowadays. Up until prior to this point, pretty standard. I leave my house about once a week. And from about 5:30, 6 in the morning to about 7 or 8 p.m. at night, I am alone because Max and Kirsten go off to work. And because I leave the house once a week, the only people I talk to are Kirsten and Max for that like 1 hour a day before we go to bed. So in my mind, they are my friends. My clients are my friends. And to some degree, I really do view the people that always tune into my videos. And I can tell like when they ask me questions, I'm like, oh, wow, you've watched a lot of my shit. That is very flattering. And they're familiar with lots of my personal approaches. They want to know my opinion. And I just think it's cool that, you know, there's people who are really passionate about their training like me, and they care what I have to say. So I really like the little community I have going. And I would like to interact with you guys more. So please don't hesitate to leave comments. I will try to answer as often as I can. Sometimes I get really busy with coaching stuff, but at other times, I'll always try to get back to you guys. If you guys have videos you want to see me make, it could be any array of videos, leave them to me. And the more creative they are, the better, more bonus points to you. If there's one that I think is really creative and sounds fun, but it has very few likes, I'll probably do it anyway. So I appreciate you guys. You guys are my friends. Remember to train hard, please.